Does building your retirement income plan seem simple? If your pension and or Social Security income more than fully cover all your expenses, it might be. But if you're like most of our clients, you've got lots of decisions to optimize. In today's show, which we're titling The Retirement Paycheck Smackdown, you'll hear your hosts duke it out over these questions in what is certainly our most argumentative episode yet. We explore, when should you take Social Security? To get a bigger tax edge, which portions of your wealth, taxable, tax-deferred, or tax-free, should you draw from first? And which parts of your portfolio should you put in each of those tax buckets? Should you do any Roth IRA conversions, and if so, when? How much and how often? We explore all that and more right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show. Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm one of your co-hosts, Erik Olson, and with me again today are Adrian Nicholson and Roshan Loungani. We're here with an exciting topic which has to do with creating a retirement paycheck. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great. I'm glad to be back. Sorry I missed last week, but it was nice to take off for spring break with the kids.
Well, we missed you. It was, but had a good conversation nonetheless. So welcome back. Adrian, how about you?
Thank you.
Good. I'm glad to be here. Roshan, I'm happy you're back. I hope you had a good time on spring break. Me and Erik had a good discussion on financial finish lines. It was a great discussion. Erik, listeners, you can check out. That's our most recent episode that went out. And happy to record another one today. I'm looking forward to our discussion on creating that retirement paycheck. I know that's something that everyone... It's a big starting point when you leave the workforce and you kind of begin that retirement stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really like this topic because I find, and please, gentlemen, jump in if you feel this is different. I find that with clients I work with, they'll have a retirement goal, and sometimes they meet it right on time, and sometimes, let's say, it's a little bit early, so they're financially ready to retire. And I've shown them the numbers for years, but they aren't necessarily emotionally ready to retire. And what I mean by that is, though they believe the numbers and they know they have enough saved, they still have a concern about not getting that paycheck. So I usually find that it's one or two meetings, maybe even more. Sometimes I definitely have clients where it's been years where they've known they're financially independent. They've wanted to retire, but they just don't feel comfortable or fully, quote unquote, believe it yet. So I found that helping them going over where their retirement paycheck will come from, how they will actually pay themselves as opposed to getting paid by an employer, makes them more comfortable in transitioning into retirement. And sometimes this discussion, as I said earlier, will happen multiple times. Sometimes it'll take years, but the goal is to make that individual understand where their money's coming from so they feel comfortable taking the leap that they've been saving for years for, which is getting into retirement, fully retiring, leaving their job, and knowing that they've got money coming in.
Yeah, Roshan, I think that's important what you said. It's a transition. I think that's the biggest thing. Just getting used to just receiving some income from different places and just having all these new questions. You don't want to get any penalties. There's that tax umbrella that you also are concerned about, and it's just a transition. And that's why this would be an important conversation to have today, because again, you kind of built up this savings and you kind of want to see what would be the most efficient way where income can come through the door. I think that's why it's going to be a great discussion today. What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to make these dollars stretch as far as they possibly can, and managing, as you said, the tax question right along with the rest of where's the money coming from is crucial, I think, to giving it the longest chance, the biggest fighting chance possible. So let's talk about the profile of the client that we're using as the hypothetical client here. Adrian, just if you were to just summarize, how old is the client? What's the inflows? What are the outflows? What's the assets and what are the liabilities?
Yeah, Erik, I'd be happy to do that. So we have a hypothetical client that we're going to be discussing today who is 67 years old. They're single. They have expenses. Their expenses are $60K a year, so that's around $5,000 a month. For Social Security, they're going to get $36,000 a year. They have no other income. They do have a home that's worth around $500,000, but it's fully paid off, so there's no mortgage. They have 3 accounts. The first one's an investment account, and that's around $200,000. The next is their Roth IRA, which is $100,000. And then their other IRA is $400,000. Their kind of risk profile, they are a moderate investor. So that's kind of our breakdown of this hypothetical client. So when we talk about creating that retirement paycheck, where this money is going to be coming from, Roshan, where's the place where you kind of start with this?
Well, so for me, it always starts with meeting their needs, right? So in this case, you mentioned the expenses are $5,000 a month. And what we were trying to do was create something that was easy to follow. It's tough sometimes to translate these numbers over audio while you're listening over the podcast, but we wanted to give you numbers that are easy to follow to understand the thought process. So we start with the expenses of $5,000, and everything we're going to discuss is after tax. So it's $5,000 after tax, includes every expense for this individual. They've got $3,000 pre-tax coming from Social Security. And that's an important distinction because we're going to talk a little bit about the taxes. So our first step is, how do we close that gap of $2,000 a month? And they have 3 places they can go for this, as Adrian mentioned. They can take some money from their IRA account, their Roth IRA, or their investment account. And what we want to do is strategically select where they're taking the money from to minimize their taxes. Also, it's important to note this person's 67. In 5 years, when they reach age 72, they're going to be required to take money out of their IRA account. So that's actually where I start, right? I want to look at their IRA and taking money out of their IRA account. And the simple answer, which we found is not the correct answer in this case, would be, hey, take the remaining out of the IRA account, and you take $2,000 after tax out of the IRA, you've got the $5,000 and you're done. That's the simple answer. It's not correct, and therein lies why this topic is so important. You've really got to plan this out strategically. So the first thing of note here that's really important is this person is single, and if you're single and you take out if you have over $25,000 in taxable income, your Social Security becomes 50% taxable. So the first thing we want to do is say, hey, can we avoid that Social Security being taxable? And what we looked at is we said, all right, strategically, if we want their Social Security to become taxable, and we just assumed we picked a high number on purpose in this case, and we said out of their $400,000 investment account, let's say they've got about 3% in dividends and short-term gains that would be taxable. So that's $12,000. And we then said, okay, we feel safe saying we don't think it'll be that high based on the client's moderate portfolio. So if we take out half of their target, a little less than that, remember, we want to keep their taxable income under $25,000. So if we take $1,000 out pre-tax from their traditional IRA per month, so that's $12,000, that would put them in the 12% bracket, and we assumed they'd pay 6% in state taxes. So now they've got $820 a month after tax towards their $5,000. So it's taking it back and summarizing this. First, they needed $5,000 a month. They have $3,000 coming from Social Security, and now we've got $820 coming from IRA withdrawals. So we've got to now fill that gap of $1,180. So I hope you can follow along as you listen to this. We're trying to build up to their income, and we're looking first at tax efficiency and what we can do to make sure their money lasts the longest, right? And saving money on taxes, managing your tax bracket and your tax and where you take money out can really help your money last longer, for one. For two, it's just an efficient way to plan in general, right? Why, whether it's taxes or any other bill or expense, why overpay on anything? So gentlemen, before we move on to filling that next gap of 1,180. Any thoughts or anything you want to add on the first step? So we took the expenses, minused off Social Security, and then we took from the retirement account with keeping Social Security or keeping the taxable income below the Social Security limit.
So, well, I guess one of the things that I think about is it's certainly useful to be mindful of that, the impact on the taxation of Social Security. But in light of the fact that in this particular case, if we said half of that, let's say 50% of her Social Security or $18,000 a year was taxed, would she be falling at this point after the subtraction of her standard deduction? And she's probably not itemizing because she's, there's not a lot of state or local, or there's no mortgage, et cetera. We don't know. You haven't explained whether she's a charitable giver, but assuming that she's using a standard deduction, then in that case, is she in the 12% bracket? I think so. And if she's in a 12% bracket on half of or on $18,000, then really we're talking about a tax bill that's around $2,100, $2,200. That's what's at stake. So in my view, I would weigh that. That's a trade-off, and all else being equal, I'd like to avoid it. But I'd also be wanting to ask, well, what if exploring two of many, many possible income withdrawal approaches. One would be to say, we're going to make up the entire difference of her income requirements from her IRA accounts, meaning every penny that comes out of those IRA accounts would be taxable. You said we'd set it up so that there would be $820 after tax that would be coming out of them. Right. So the question I would ask is, well, what would happen if instead you just said, we're going to go for, we'll say $2,000 coming out of her IRAs on an after-tax basis. Yes, she suffers that $2,000 to $2,100 to $2,200 tax hit by so doing, but does it tee her up later to avoid being pushed into higher marginal income tax brackets?
Yeah, great question. I want to come back to that because I want to answer the question first of where's the rest of the money coming from. Of the 11,800, I'm sorry, she needs 1,180, and that'll be a quick answer. We were thinking for right now that 1,180 is going to come from her investment account, dividends, income, and potentially selling some securities as needed for that 1,180. So to simplify it for this individual client, first she needs $5,000 a month, $3,000 from Social Security, $820 is the after-tax income from her traditional IRA. We would set up a direct deposit going right into her account on whatever date she wanted, and then 1,180 would be also coming from a direct deposit from her regular investment account. So that's what we had first. Now, Erik, you bring up a very interesting point. We approach this from a Roth conversion perspective, right? We're thinking our tax rates are likely going to go up. Is it worthwhile for her to convert money using to a Roth IRA, which is the same from a pure tax perspective, Erik? It's just what you described, right? When you take money from a traditional IRA for income, you'll pay tax on it. When you take money from a traditional IRA and convert it to a Roth, you pay the same tax on it, right? So from the IRS perspective and taxation perspective, it's the same thing. And when you're converting money from a traditional to a Roth IRA, there are a couple things you want to look at. One is a little bit of the tax rate arbitrage. Do you think you as an individual will go up or down in the tax bracket going forward? The second thing we also like to look at here, and there are definitely more than just two, but the second one that stands out is what will your required minimum distributions be? So at age 72, how much will you be required to take out, and what tax bracket will that put you in? So here's where, while you're listening along, the numbers can get a little bit more difficult. But we had said Eric, let's say she went and made her Social Security taxable fully. So we're talking about going up through that threshold. And let me restate that. Let's say she made her Social Security 50% taxable. We're now using the income where it's 50% taxable. You mentioned that number of $18,000 a year. Well, what's going to happen if she does that is she's actually going to bump. She's going to still be in the 12% bracket, right? So $18,000 times 12 is $2,160 in taxes. So she's in the 12% bracket, making that taxable. But I view that tax on Social Security, I view that as a tax on the additional money from the IRA. And the reason I view it that way is because if we took the money from another source, she wouldn't have to pay that. So now if you view it from that perspective, she's now, and I actually have the exact number on here. I want to go a step further. Let's say it's 85% taxable. So we go down the path of fully converting. I'm doing that for my convenience because I kept that number in front of me, and I don't have the exact, but I've got it right in front of me. So what we're doing now is we're taking her all the way up to where her Social Security is 85% taxable, and we're saying let's maximize her conversions up to the 22% bracket. Right, so the 22% bracket is $86,375. So what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, take out 86,000, take out about 30,000 pre-tax to live off of, and you're converting the other 56. And in this client's case, what makes this a very good idea initially, and then once again we reverse course when we go through the data, is that she has a lot of money in a regular investment account. So when she converts, she will not be paying the tax out of the conversion.
All right.
That's key, right? So when she converts 50,000, all that 50,000 goes to a Roth. She's not converting 50, sending 15 in taxes, and then getting 35 in that Roth. So she's converting 50 using her taxable account to pay it. Well, here's what happens in this case. Now her Social Security is 85% taxable. Not tax rate, taxable. So we take her 36,000 in income, we multiply it by 85%, that's 30,600. I'm using the 22% bracket here because once again we've bumped her up into that bracket, and we're looking at her having $6,732 in taxes on that money. That additional taxation is $6,732. Here's why the Roth conversion doesn't work. I look at this $6,732 as if it's a tax. In my mind, it's not actually what's happening, but it's a tax on that conversion of about $50,000. So that's about a 13% tax on that 50. When you take that number, 6,732 divided by 50, that's 13% tax. And then she's converting everything else at the 22% bracket. So you add that 13 plus 22, and granted, I haven't gone through just because it's too many numbers for the podcast, I haven't gone through each level to give the effective tax rate. Let's just use my 35% tax. So what's happening is she's converting 50,000. That money will be tax-free in the future that she can take out, and she's effectively paid 22% on that conversion plus 13 on her Social Security, so a 35% tax in total here. The problem is, based on her income and expenses, including her required minimum distributions, we don't ever anticipate her going over the 22% bracket.
All right.
Right. She'll always be in the 12% bracket. Now, granted, it'll go up to 15, but that 12% bracket goes all the way up to $40,000 right now. It's about $40,950. Sorry, 40,525, excuse me, is the number. So why would you pay 35% effectively, including that Social Security piece, when you could pay 22?
Well, I think you're right to be looking at the marginal impact of things as opposed to the average. So and for our listeners, let me just explain the difference. So if we had said, well, she's going to pull out $80,000, including the amount that she'll have a tax, she'll pursue a total taxable income level that taps out the upper level of the 22% tax bracket. Okay, so that's the premise of this conversation that we're having right now, which I think you said was $83,000. Is that correct? And I'm not looking at the number right now. It was about $83,000.
You had said the top marginal bracket. Yeah,
all
that's
right.
correct. The top marginal is $86,375.
Okay, 86,000. Right. Okay, thank you. And so in this case, one way of looking at this from the average tax rate would be to say how much federal income tax in total would she incur if she was taking all $36,000 of her Social Security, taking out so much more from her IRAs, whether for spending or for conversion, that she brought the total amount of taxable income up to the $86,000 level. In her case, that means about $56,000 of IRA money pulled out on top of the $30,000 of the $36,000 of her Social Security that would be taxable. So when she does that, you could say, okay, well, what's the total tax bill on that $86,000? I'm going to say that the total tax bill, including the amount on the Social Security, is in the neighborhood. I'll say it's in the neighborhood of about probably 16 or 17%. Probably actually closer to 16% average tax rate on all of that. What you've done correctly is to say, no, that's not the relevant number. The relevant number is the marginal amount. So if we had only taken out, as you said earlier, $12,000 from our IRAs on top of her Social Security, she would have had none of her Social Security taxed. And it would only have been the $12,000 that she was pulling from her IRAs. Only that portion would be taxed, and that portion would be taxed at 10 and 12%. So it's a very, very gentle, very, very gentle tax rate. So what we really want to do is compare the difference in total taxes, not the total taxes of one, but the difference in the total taxes between the two, and then divide that in the difference of the amounts pulled out from the IRAs to arrive at the effective tax rate on those additional IRA withdrawals. So I agree with you. That's a fairly high tax rate at a marginal level. But I have a response to that. Before I go into my response, though, is there anything you want to say in response to what I just said?
No, you basically said I was right the whole time. So
I said your approach of examining the marginal part was right. But here's what I'm going to suggest you consider, just at least consider.
Yep.
Is number one, she's 67. She could She could go into the Social Security office tomorrow, suspend her Social Security, wait and leave it for 3 more years, and in so doing, let's forget about the inflation adjustment, the COLA adjustment that will apply. But just taking $36,000, that would be around 25% higher, 24% higher to be exact. But we'll just call it 25 just to make the math easy. She would lift her non-inflation adjusted annual amount from Social Security in just 3 years from now, from the $36,000 she's getting right now to $45,000 a year. That closes a big portion of her overall spending need right there by waiting 3 years. What happens if she says, I'll live off of my taxable accounts, I'll live off of them entirely, the taxable investment accounts, for the next 3 years. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I'll just do full blowout on the conversion of the IRAs and take out $86,000 a year of IRAs taxed at the marginal rate is the average rate at 16%, 16% average, or if my approximation is correct. Now she's just turned $86,000 of IRAs into Roth IRAs that she'll be able to use later to avoid what would be a 25% marginal rate.
I flaw in your logic, Eric.
Me.
Here's what I say. She's never going to be in two things. One is to replicate that $60,000, and I'm doing, once again, simple, just using the marginal tax level. She's going to have to take out $83,000.
Okay.
Right, when you consider federal and state taxes. $83,000 puts her at the $3,000 away from the top of the 22% bracket, which means you're not getting anything but $3,000 in Roth conversions.
Wait, why is that?
For one, because she needs $60,000 a year to live off of on an after-tax
She's living
basis.
off her taxable account.
Okay, so you're not touching the IRA money, but you're going to do conversions still, right?
In other words, she's going to her checking account or her her stock and bond account that's not in an IRA, not in a Roth. She's living off of that.
No, get it?
And then she.
So how much are you converting?
The full $86,000 that would take her right to the top of the 22% bracket.
Okay. So once again, the flaw I see in that is she's never going to be in that bracket. You're having her pay 10% extra in taxes. She's going to be in the 12% bracket to live off of if she takes her Social Security or lives off her taxable. If you convert up to the 12% bracket of $40,000 a year, I'm with you. You go up to the 22% bracket, and in my mind, you've paid 10% more in taxes now than she's ever going to pay because she never needs to be above the 12, for one. For two, let's just say you want to argue the tax rates will go up, and I'll concede they're likely to go up. That 12 is going to go up to 15. Mm-hmm. So she still paid 7% more in taxes than she ever would.
Only on some portion of the money. She paid zero.
On some portion, yeah.
She paid 0% on the.
Eric, you're talking.
Wait. She's.
Hold on. You're talking $30,000 of it. You're converting 40. She's overpay. She's paying $30,000 at her current bracket, and then she's paying $56,000 at a higher bracket.
She's paying on the first amount, which she gets to use a standard deduction against. We'll call it $13,000 to make it easy. She's paying 0. Then on the next $10,000, she's paying only 10. So here she's already reached $24,000 of her income need, and she's only paid $1,000 of taxes, federal taxes. Next, she takes out. Help me on the next stage of this. She up to 40.
It's up to 40. Okay. It's 30. 30,000.
Okay.
Call it 30,000.
So 30,000 more. She takes at 12. So there's.
So I'm on board with you. Right. Here's where you lose me. The next step.
She's at $4,600 of total taxes now, and now she takes out. We said another $40,000, and she does that at 22%. That's 80. I'm going to round it to call it $9,000.
Why would
she's spent?
Why would you take a penny out at 22? That's my argument. In her case, she's even including required minimum distributions in the future, she's never going to be in the 22% bracket.
Well, first of all, I don't know that because that's making an assumption about the growth of her or the relatively modest growth of the amounts in her IRAs and what will happen as she reaches the later stages of her life and the life expectancy factor that's used to determine the required minimum distribution.
We assume. We assumed well, this is based on moderate growth and the current tax tables that we have for required minimum distributions. Okay. So let's stick with the data we have, barring tax code changes or bracket changes, aside from the 12 going to 15 that I'll concede. Why would you convert any?
Well, yeah.
Let me say it another way. Why would you pay a guaranteed extra 10% in taxes for the uncertainty of a possibility of changes in the future?
Well, I'll tell you that because that's a great question, and that's a totally fair question. If all I was doing with her Roth IRA was structuring it in such a way that it was built as a moderate allocation, as would be under this assumption of uniform allocation within her Roth, in her IRA, and in her taxable account, let's say a 60-40 allocation in each of those buckets, then yeah, it probably doesn't make any sense. But
yeah, and I'm saying that's included, right? Like when we looked at the analysis, we used a moderate growth rate, and we looked at her future required minimum distributions, and her required minimum distributions in the future were in the $24,000 neighborhood, right?
Here's the secret.
So she's still, if you go forward, let me finish the one point. Let's just say you go forward now. She's got to take out the required minimum distributions, which are about $24,000. And then she's supplementing with her taxable and her Roth IRA for everything else that she needs. She's solidly in the middle of the current 12% bracket.
Okay, so here's the secret that that I believe is relatively unrecognized out there, and that is you can still advantageously convert at a higher tax rate than you would subsequently incur if you didn't do Roth conversions on your IRA distributions later in life. You can still advantageously do that if you supercharge the high growth things in your Roth IRA for, enough years to not only recoup, but then surpass the setback from having paid that higher marginal rate early on. And
I have to challenge
okay.
you on that. You're paying a guaranteed extra 10 or extra 7, assuming rates go up from 12 to 15, for an uncertain higher rate of return for a moderate investor, right? So I get what you're saying, and I'm going to explain this for everyone and the listeners. I just got really into it to challenge you. But what Erik is saying is, let's just simplify this and say this person is moderate, half stocks, half bonds. Put the stocks in the Roth, the bonds in the traditional IRA / taxable. You'd measure tax things and what, if they're individual stocks, taxable account. But let's overly simplify this. The stocks are in the Roth, and you're saying they're going to supercharge the growth, and that will offset the higher tax bracket over time.
So.
And I'm saying mathematically that's possible. Not disagreeing with that. I'd have to see the years on, if you're comparing between the 22% bracket and the 24% bracket, where there's just a 2% difference, and the fact that the 24 is likely to become 28 and the 22 is likely to become 25, I'm on board. But when you're saying 12 up to 22, that 10% is going to take a long time to outperform. Plus, what if there is a more typical market decline? Right. Remember, between 2000 and 2010, the S&P was flat. We have another decade like that, and all you did was waste 10% of her money.
Well, I certainly think if you have another decade like that, that's possibly true. She's 67, not 87. So, there's that. And so she does have, we're assuming if she lives till a normal life expectancy, that she has probably a 20-year runway for that investment thesis to play itself out.
I'm fine. So the assumption we're making here is that tax brackets go up from 12, where she's currently in the 12%, she's going up to the 15%. And I'm taking out my calculator to figure this out, and I'm going to use your numbers, Erik. So let's go with your numbers. Let's say it's 50,000 converted now, right? And I know we're talking about paying it out of her investment account, but just to make my calculation easier, I'm going to take the tax out of this for the Roth, just because I'm not going to be able to put this in a computer. I'm doing it with my hand. So she's paying 7% extra in taxes on this. So she's got 46,500. What's her growth rate in the Roth IRA?
Well,
moderate investor, you're putting the aggressive portion in there. What do you want
I'll
to say?
I'll say, just because I have subdued expectations across the board, I'll say that on that portion, probably an 8.
Okay. That seems a little bit high to me, but I'll go with that.
All right, let's
just say
let's say 7. I'm fine
years.
with 7. Well, let's use whatever assumption that you want.
All right, 7% in 20 years, she has call it $180,000.
Okay.
So that same 50,000, I've got present value. We used just 7%. So that same 50,000 using the 7% rate of return, it says it's 164,000 in 20 years versus 179. I want to take that number and make it 15 years. So in 15 years, we're looking at 137 if you delay the taxes, 117. I'm sorry, listeners. I'm a nerd for this, and I need to know the outcome. That same 15 years down the road, it works in 15 years as well. You're at 128 in 10 years. In 10 years, it looks like 10 years is approximately the break
And what
even.
growth rate were you assuming on the portion that's not supercharged?
7. I think the answer that you have will be correct based on depending on the time frame. So to me, this is a time frame question.
Absolutely. It's a time frame thing. Mm-hmm.
But fundamentally, the other issue I have with it is I have an issue. I would want that time frame to be so short that my concern of you overpaying taxes now And once again, what I keep saying is it's a guaranteed tax versus an uncertain return.
All right. Yeah.
Right.
Well, so I think you're absolutely right that there is uncertainty in my approach where there's a certainty about the higher tax that's being paid in your particular approach. The difference I would though highlight is I wouldn't use the same assumption about growth rates in the two scenarios, because I wouldn't treat the IRA
here's why I think
money
you should.
left in the IRA as also growing at 7%. Because if we're using 7% as the supercharged portion, the all equity portion, then but she's not an all equity investor, then you should
Hold on, but Erik, you're cherry picking now, because here's the deal: she has in total 700,000 is our total number, right? And simplifying it again, half her money is going to be stocks, half in bonds. So by saying you can't compare it fairly, those dollars you're converting to the Roth would still be invested in stocks in a different account. And I've evened the playing field by saying you're paying the tax at the end versus now.
Well,
you're saying you're doing it by total account, and I'm saying you can't do it that way. You've got to do it by total investments, because she's going to have stocks one place and bonds another anyway.
So I look at it slightly differently. I recognize that the total composition of her portfolio under this assumption of 50-50 would be $350,000 of stocks and $350,000 of bonds. I'm saying the more that you convert into a Roth, the more you locate those stocks in the Roth portion. And so it enjoys a disproportionately higher, the tax-free portion of your portfolio enjoys a disproportionately higher outcome. And so...
Right, but what you'd be doing, let's just say she had 700,000 in one account, regardless of where, right? Let's say it's a taxable account, right? She's going to have half in stocks and half in bonds.
Yes.
350 in each. You've done a conversion and you've said, well, the Roth is all in stocks.
Right.
Right? So I'm not disagreeing with you on that, but her overall exposure in stock versus bond is the same. True,
but the portion, and that's absolutely true. But initially at least, but the portion of the portion of her the portion of her equity portfolio that will suffer ordinary income taxes on every penny of growth is now lower under my scenario.
Agreed, but you can't compare it the way you're doing. The way you're doing it is flawed. By just saying the Roth is having greater growth, what you need to do is give them both, assign the same growth, and then account for taxation at the end.
I disagree with that statement, but I'll work it out in a spreadsheet, and I'll come back and I'll apologize next week if I'm wrong. Actually, in 2 weeks' time, because we have a guest next week.
No, but conceptually, why do you disagree? Because I'm saying that the tax is different. I'm not saying that they're not different, but you've got an 8% growth. You pay a tax on the dollars now, get an 8% growth in the Roth versus not paying the tax on it now, having the growth in the traditional in this case, and paying the tax at the end. Right? But that growth on those dollars are still the same growth.
Well,
and the Roth will eventually break even and be greater over time. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying if you're saying, well, the Roth is worth more, so do the conversion, I think you're missing that tax portion.
The reason I'm saying this, Roshan, is because I have worked it out on a spreadsheet before, and I've done it over a variety of time periods, but certainly, in that 15, 20 year phase, the way I normally would structure this is to say, if she's overall 50-50, then by virtue of concentrating her growth-oriented pieces in her Roth IRA, what will happen over time is I will gradually ratchet down the composition of stocks in her IRA. In fact, I will put almost entirely, almost all of the bonds would be in her IRA. And so
I get that you're doing that, but you're still overall having, if you look at her overall portfolio, you still have the same exposure to stocks and bonds as a percentage.
That's true. Yes, it is.
Right. So if you exclude the fact, you're just saying, hey, the Roth is worth more because it's in higher growth. And that's agreed. Right. However, if you exclude the fact that she'd still have the growth elsewhere, she just has to change how the taxation is, which I feel like you're doing. You're not doing a fair comparison.
Well,
I don't need a spreadsheet to tell me a tax-free account with an 8% rate of return is worth more than a taxable account or an IRA with a 4% return. Do you see?
I
the
do
point?
see the initial point.
What I think you're missing.
Well, I'll have to go back to I'll have to just go back to my spreadsheet because and come back in 2 weeks. As I said, we have a guest next week, but come back in 2 weeks with the response. So I take your criticism.
I just think you're missing that one one part.
Fair enough.
Well, and we went really down the path on this, but those are the items that I wanted to cover. One is the simple stuff we started with of where your money's coming from, and then whether it makes sense to do a conversion with the expectation of higher tax rates. And just I was a little bit surprised that I found that it didn't. And you and I can work through and be the spreadsheet nerds to figure this out, because I'm genuinely curious about this, because I was so surprised that a conversion didn't make sense because of tax rates and where they were going. But yeah, that went down a path I didn't exactly expect when we started.
Yeah, and Roshan, I was wondering if you could probably touch on that Social Security point that Erik brought on. How much would it impact, if not, or play a factor in the timing on when this client would take their Social Security? Because that's like the biggest decision people make when they begin that transition into the retirement stage of their life, when to take their Social Security, or should they delay it more and receive some more down the line? How much does that really impact, if at all, your kind of numbers that you just went through?
Yeah, so I love the idea, Erik, and I'll tell you, before you mentioned it, so this is a hypothetical case that comes from conversations with multiple clients. And for our listeners, that's how a lot of what we prepare is what are we dealing with as advisors and what are we seeing. So I had multiple clients and I took pieces of all their situation. And so in this episode, it's based on my clients versus Erik and Adrian's at this time. So Erik, the client I had in mind that's really the foundation of this, she wanted Social Security now regardless because it made her comfortable. And we had gone through the numbers with her on delaying it. So I didn't actually explore it until when I had the conversation with the client and she sort of ended the conversation. I didn't actually then explore it further because I had gone through estimates with her, and her response was basically like, I know what the numbers say, but I'm not going to feel comfortable retiring unless I have that guaranteed income from Social Security. So it sort of ended there. But the one part, and I ran these numbers pretty quickly as you said it, where I like the concept, but I don't know if it would work, is once again, for her to get the income she needs, she's now bumped up to the 22% bracket. Well, I'm sorry. That was with conversions. If she were to delay her Social Security, take out income from the IRA up to the 12% bracket, which would be $40,000, and then supplement the difference with a taxable account, I think that would be a great idea. Or combination of converting up to the 12. And when we went down that long path, Erik, if you remember, I agree with you completely up until the 12.
No, right? Up to the 20.
When you go from 12 to 22,
not above 12.
That's
I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
That's when I start. And I, quite frankly, I feel like there's minimal debate up to 12.
Absolutely zero debate.
And we both agree that we think the bracket's going to go up to 15. But let's just take that off the table too. Let's say it doesn't. Right? She's going to be in this current level bracket unless brackets change for the rest of her life. So if we can get her to delay her Social Security, convert up to the $40,000 number, which is the 12% bracket, and then live off of the investment account, that would be the optimal situation for her in the long run.
All right. Well, fair enough. Well, listen, this is a big topic today. We haven't really dug into what we would do with the portion of her portfolio that is in her taxable account. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Well, going back to what you had said supercharging the Roth, investing the growth pieces there. I think you look at it as, and as we've discussed how we invest before, we use multi-factor, multi-strategy approaches to investing. And from that point, we both do things a little bit different, but we similar, but not the same. I would take any individual stocks that she had where we could look at long-term capital gains, and that part of the portfolio goes in the taxable account. Any stock strategies that would be more ETF mutual fund driven, and once again, this is as much as we can, in the Roth IRA, and try to stuff as much as the income portions that she'd pay tax on into the traditional IRA. Now, as most people are out there, she is in a situation where she has significantly more of her assets, about 60 to 70% in her traditional IRA, versus the Roth is the smallest, being about 15%. So we can't do this entirely the way we'd like to from being completely tax efficient, but we definitely want to think about that. The other thing that comes to mind, just as you mentioned this, is how important it is to just know your tax situation and not have it dictated to you at the end of the year. Like in this client's case in particular, she'd pay an extra $2,000 roughly in taxes if she took the simple approach of saying, hey, let's just take it from the traditional IRA, right? So in her case now, she needs $5,000 a month, $3,000 comes from her, and this bad example I'm giving you, $3,000 comes from her Social Security. She ends up taking the other, the balance from her IRA account. Well, now she's got to take out $33,000. She's paying 12% in tax on that, and now her Social Security is taxable. She's paying another $2,100 in taxes on that. So she's effectively paying a little over 20% in taxes, where she only has to pay 12. So to me, the takeaways from this are: plan out where your income is coming from. Think about taxes in terms of your income, but also in terms of your investments, right? You've got to just know if there's a little hole in the bucket that we'll call taxes, you want to make sure you minimize that as much as possible.
All right. Well, gentlemen, is there anything else to say?
I have nothing to add. Thank you guys. Erik, thanks for putting up with me. I know I really got excited with some of those numbers there.
I recognize, I think this is probably the one where we've had more irreconcilable differences of outlook than we've had in any previous episode. So that's pretty cool. It's
well, and if you really, I know how much free time you have, right? so if you actually take the time to do the spreadsheet, I would love to see what the outcome is, because as I said, I was surprised by the outcome of don't convert. So I'd love to see if I missed something or if it was wrong.
Adrian, anything to add?
Nothing to add, but I think we should call this like Battle of the Retirement Check, because like you said, Erik, this is like the one time you and Roshan really had a true debate.
Yeah. So I just wish I had the mad on the fly spreadsheeting skills that Roshan has, because he's sitting there whipping out. He's just his fingers are just flying on the calculator, and then he rips over to the spreadsheet, and he's recording all at the same time. It's amazing.
I was waiting for you to close out of the browser, Erik, and just leave. Like, I completely disagree with you, Roshan. Yeah. Just exit out of the podcast.
Take off the mic and walk out of the room.
Yeah, the dramatic turn around and walk out that door behind you. You shouldn't leave the browser. You should leave the browser on and walk out the door.
That's even more dramatic. Oh, that'd be great. Well, anyway, listeners, thank you. If you have stayed with us until this point, you truly deserve some sort of award yourself. I mean, because this has been, you've had to have mad listening skills to stick with us this long through this particular podcast, but we appreciate it. And so if you are here still listening, then you certainly are the ones that we want to ask to go out there and on your favorite podcast app, go ahead and, if you haven't already done so, subscribe. Make sure that you leave us a review. It can even be, in this case, we'll accept a review that says, "Wow, these guys really lost me," but make it 5 stars while you say that we lost you. Also, you can look in our show notes for ways to reach out to us and contact us if there were points that we made during this, or that we didn't really make very clearly that you wanted clarified. You certainly can reach out to us there. And we'll be back next week with a guest who's going to be a representative of one of the leading faith-based investing firms, who's going to be talking about that particular subset of the larger values-based investing universe. And he'll come and we'll be posing questions to him to understand the history of that movement and what recent developments there have been and where that is going to be trending over time. So we're really looking forward to that conversation. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about, first of all, we'll be resolving as part A, we'll just kind of do the sort of the sort of follow-up to the vigorous debate today, but the main focus of our recording in 2 weeks will be on inflation, and we're looking at there's a lot of conversation lately. Should we be expecting higher or perhaps even significantly higher inflation? If so, what does that mean for you as you think about your retirement and creating that retirement paycheck? So we've got a lot to talk about over the next couple of weeks, but we really do thank you for staying and listening. Gentlemen, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.